Our next speaker is a former Apple employee, did a lot of work on the NSURL connection. He currently works on robots at Anki. You may have seen him somewhere before. Okay. Please give a round of applause to Mark Pauley.
Hello. Okay. You guys hear me? Is that good? Hey, how's it going? My name is Mark Pauley. As she said, I used to work on NSURL connection. I'm sorry. I'm now working at Anki. I'm the lead iOS software engineer there. I was involved with the stunt last year in front of WWDC. That was probably the scariest moment of my entire life. I think I still have PTSD from that. And I'm here to talk to you guys today about Bluetooth Low Energy, which is kind of a little-known technology. Maybe a lot of you guys here know it because you're very technical, but this is a pretty little-known technology, and I think it's going to be basically as important, if not more important, than USB, for example. So, what's the deal with this? Basically, there's this concept of the Internet of Things that people are throwing around, and this is like, we're going to have everything connected to the internet. So, we're going to have clocks and trains and cows and other stuff connected to the internet. The question is, like, what is this connection medium? And I think that, the medium is very important. Like, the protocol that we're connecting over makes a huge difference in what we can do with it. And the main challenges for this, looks like the top of this is getting cut off somehow. First challenge is power. So the batteries need to be very, very small in these little Internet of Things devices. You're going to have devices everywhere, right? Like all over the place. You're going to have hearing aids that want to be connected to the internet, heart monitors, kind of anything that you could think would want to be connected to the internet, because we want to gather data and use this as feedback mechanism. The next is that you shouldn't have to recharge your battery all the time. You don't want to have to plug your watch in every 3 hours, right? Next thing is connectivity. So this is kind of funny. It seems like it goes without saying, but it should be able to connect to your mobile phone. But the current, or previous to Bluetooth Low Energy, the sort of communication protocols that could connect to these low-power devices were all very I'm sorry, I'm thinking of the word right now. They were all proprietary. So nothing worked with anything else. And I'm talking about like the mice, like the little dongles that they use to connect mice to your computer, and things like that, keyboards, etc. Everybody rolled their own, and this sucked because you can't put a dongle on a phone. That's no fun. And the last thing is range. So we have NFC, right? But that kind of sucks because you need to basically have your phone up against something in order to communicate. And if I'm going to hold my phone against a thermostat, like I might as well just flip the thermostat, right? Or the light switch or whatever, right? So NFC is basically a no-go. So Nokia basically created this thing called Bluetooth Low Energy. They've branded it Bluetooth Smart, which is a terrible name. So I'm going to refer to it as BLE. And the question is, what is BLE? So it's a low-power extension to Bluetooth. It's not compatible at the physical layer with classic Bluetooth. This is really important. So it's completely different protocol at the physical layer. Still lives in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. Was developed by Nokia in 2004. And Nokia was really smart. They basically snuck this in to the Bluetooth 4.0 spec. So when you guys see Bluetooth 4.0, that means that the device supports BLE. It's not the other way around, by the way. There are devices that are BLE only, but devices that claim to be Bluetooth 4.0 must support Bluetooth Low Energy. So it's kind of sneaky, but it was sweet because now we have the opportunity to use this awesome technology. It uses the 2.4 gigahertz RF band, and it uses basically something called idle mode in order to save power. And idle mode just means that the wireless antenna is powered off almost most of the time. So basically, the antenna wakes up very sporadically to kind of send chirps of information out. And that's where the power savings comes from. So the fundamental kind of insight into this issue that Nokia had was that most of the time, there's nothing to say. There's absolutely no data to send. And so you might as well power the antenna down. So this whole technology is built around this premise of keeping the antenna powered down for as much of the duty cycle as is possible. So why Bluetooth low energy? And it seems like I've foiled them the second time. So first of all, power. Classic Bluetooth uses way too much power. The battery life in classic Bluetooth is measured in days or months, if you're lucky. Wi-Fi is even worse. So Wi-Fi devices, I don't know if you've ever used like a battery-operated Wi-Fi device, like a Parrot AR drone or something like that. But those things just absolutely suck power because it takes a lot of energy in order to transmit Wi-Fi. Battery life there is in hours. BLE has a latency versus power trade-off. So basically, if you're okay with not getting data at such a fast rate, you can scale back your transmission and save a lot of power. And BLE devices can, if you configure them properly, operate for years on a coin cell battery. We've actually seen people who are now creating these devices where they basically take a coin cell battery and they seal it into a plastic enclosure so that you would destroy the thing in order to pop it open. And now you have these basically like kind of internet-capable rocks, basically. They're like completely self-contained objects that you can't get into. And that's fine because they last for like 5 to 10 years. So the next one is connection. And mostly I'm just going to kind of complain about the current stuff that's out there. So Wi-Fi sucks. Classic Bluetooth sucks. Typical BLE connection, unlike Wi-Fi and Bluetooth pairing, is under 2 seconds. And Bluetooth connection is actually pretty decent in terms of its noise avoidance characteristics. And I'll go into that in a minute. This was really important for us when we were on stage last year, because basically you have a situation where there's 700 wireless routers in front of you, like broad spectrum, 2.4 gigahertz noise, and that can cause problems. It's like really tough to get through. And finally, this doesn't require a dongle because Nokia snuck it into the spec. Now every iPhone since the iPhone 4S is Bluetooth low energy capable. And so the last thing that I'd like to talk about in terms of why use BTLE is range. So you got up to about 30 meters experimentally, which is actually way farther than classic Bluetooth. So I did an experiment where I turned on one of our little Anki Drive cars and walked away just to see when it would disconnect. And I was able to get, about 150 feet away, which is pretty far. I mean, way farther than you would want to be playing our game. Okay, whoop. So also, this is kind of like an interesting detail. On a very low level, BLE guarantees message delivery, which means you don't have to worry about, retransmit. You don't have to worry about partially received packets. These are all problems with Zigbee. Zigbee is totally tough to work with in a real-world situation because you might get some of the bytes. You might get some bytes and not other bytes. You might get, byte 3 and byte 7, and you have to figure that out. You have to know that you got only those 2 bytes and not the rest of them. And then the last thing is noise mitigation. And this is actually kind of a deep topic, and I want to talk, kind of in depth about this and why what exactly the noise mitigation characteristics are. So BLE, basically what they did in designing BLE is you'll see these three blue kind of bell curves here are the standard Wi-Fi channels. So these are the three independent Wi-Fi transmission channels. And they picked the BLE advertisement channels, the colored bell curves, to be outside of them. So they're either hiding in the middle or they're off to the side. And this is really important because just by picking them to be outside of, the Wi-Fi channels, these things right there get, basically 12 to 24 dB of signal clearance in a typical situation. Now, of course, WWDC, right, we're talking about straight line of white noise in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. So that's a little bit tougher. But still, even then, if they split their thing into 3 channels, you're doing pretty good. And these things actually don't coincide with any of the channels, including, all of the other channels. So you get at least 3 dB of noise clearance just from that. Also interestingly enough, it kind of, just to kind of go back to that real fast, it randomly chooses. So the BLE device will like randomly choose which one of these to advertise on. So it's not like you pick one and you're stuck with it. Basically, you don't have a very high chance of, some single point of noise screwing with you here. Next is actually after you already make the connection, you have this band jumping characteristic. So there's basically 37 frequency bands. And this is interesting because they picked a prime number here, which means that you can pick any number under 37 as your frequency hopping length, and you will visit all of these frequency bands before you come back to the first one again. So BLE, after it makes the connection, sends, I'm going to hop at 5, or I'm going to hop at 7 or 2 or whatever frequencies. And then you play like a little hop game through this where the transmission and the transmitter and the receiver wake up at the same time on the same channel. And because they spread it like this throughout the spectrum, again, we tend to avoid noise sources. So BLE is actually pretty dang good at not getting knocked out by any particular noise source. So it's pretty sweet. Basically, it takes like a microwave with like a burrito wrapped in tinfoil in it to kill BLE. It's like, or a jammer, that we proved that could happen every time. So the downsides. BLE is so awesome. Why shouldn't everybody use it? The first downside is throughput. Maximum size of these messages is 20 bytes. Well, it was 20 bytes. Apple now included this so that you can basically use subsequent connection intervals and get up to like 132 bytes at a time. But this is 20 bytes per connection interval. The lowest connection interval is 20 milliseconds. If you do the math on that, that gives you 1 kilobyte per second, which is pretty crummy. We can actually negotiate a little bit higher than this, and there's tricks around it. But you're talking about maybe you'll get 5 times higher than that. So you get 5 kilobytes per second. That's not you can't do audio over that. You can't do video over that. So if you're thinking about doing audio or video, BLE is not for you. Next thing is latency. So everybody here knows that Wi-Fi latency is typically like 3 to 10 milliseconds. And Ethernet is typically 1 millisecond if you have a good Ethernet connection between 2 computers. This is basically 20 milliseconds minimum. And Apple actually won't let you go any lower than that unless you make a special type of device, like a hearing aid or something, where you actually do want to send very low quality audio over it. So yeah, it's just not suitable for audio. The latency is not good enough. People can hear this. This sounds like crap. But I just want to say it's probably okay. So under 100 milliseconds is actually usually perfectly fine for most applications. And I'm talking about like control applications where you're performing some action, you're receiving some feedback, and you want somebody's cognitive process to match those two together, right? If you push a button on a controller for a video game and you see the character jump within 100 milliseconds, your brain automatically matches those two, and it feels to you like it's nice and kind of tight control. So I recommend that everybody in this room checks out this link, and I'll post also a link to these slides at the end of this, so everybody can actually click on that, because it's kind of hard to click on it from here. And this is Mr. Stuart Cheshire wrote this awesome article called "It's the Latency Stupid," and he's the one that invented Bonjour and multicast DNS. So this guy also wrote the first network multiplayer game, which was known as Bolo. I don't know if any of you remember Bolo, but super sweet game. So it's much harder to deal with power than throughput, it turns out. So we're trading off latency and power and throughput, but actually power is the hardest one of everything to get rid of. So the Bluetooth Low Energy is actually pretty sweet. We've found that 20 milliseconds is perfect for what we need to do. Even round trip, that's 40 milliseconds. That's under 100 milliseconds. So you're right in the ballpark. Now, Bluetooth and Anki Drive. So how does Anki Drive use Bluetooth Low Energy in order to kind of make a robot video game? So first, we start out with the first player being the host. So this is what is referred to as a central in Bluetooth terminology. Every car connects to the central as a peripheral. So peripherals advertise. Centrals are the ones that listen for the advertisements. In that sense, the peripherals are kind of like the server. I'll kind of go over this again, but it's weird. Bluetooth Low Energy is backwards. When you want multiple cars, no problem. Now you just have multiple peripherals. You connect to all of them. This is kind of different from Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi, you're usually only connected to one thing, like one router. Whereas with Bluetooth Low Energy, Apple's operating system basically time slices between each one of these and manages multiple connections simultaneously. And they've done a really great job. I've heard some talk of like the underlying mechanism. It's super cool. Yeah, so what if we want to do like a multiplayer game now? Well, usually the easiest way to do multiplayer game is client-server. So Apple actually allows you to turn the phones into peripherals. So they act just like the cars would. They're basically dumb joysticks. And we do all of the work on one phone. And it's not a big deal. In fact, it works pretty dang well. You can't really tell where the processing is going on. So I just want to go over some quick Bluetooth main concepts. These things took me a while to kind of understand, so I think it's helpful to explain them to other people. So BLE main concepts consist of peripherals, centrals, then we got services, and finally characteristics. There's also another thing underneath characteristics, but in practice, I mean, they're called descriptors. In practice, you don't really need to get too worried about those. Maybe for like well-known BLE stuff, but I'm not really going to cover that. But just remember that there are also another thing underneath that. This works like a tree, basically. So peripherals and centrals will be kind of the center parts in the tree, and services and characteristics are like the branches as you go down, with the characteristics being the leaves. Okay, so peripherals advertise their availability. They broadcast at a given time interval. This is completely configurable. The embedded device is typically the peripheral. So usually it's like the small thing is the peripheral. The thing that you want to know about is like the Nike Fuel Band or the Anki Drive cars or the iBeacon. So the small thing advertises that it's there. Next, let's talk about centrals. So the centrals scan for the peripheral advertisements. They connect to the peripherals. The mobile device is typically the central. So basically iPhones. I believe there's also now some sort of Bluetooth low energy stuff going on with the Apple TV. I want to say actually the Apple TV is a peripheral. So it's kind of interesting. Apple has this cool kind of diagram that shows you what's going on here. So the peripheral is considered to be the server because the server has the data, and the central is the phone because the phone wants the data. And this is, if you're thinking about like a thermostat or I don't know, some other kind of Bluetooth low energy sensor, right? The sensor has the data, your phone wants the data. This can get flipped, but it's helpful to kind of think of it like that. Okay, so now to get in kind of the meat of it, let's talk about services. So services group multiple independent values. Each one of these values is called a characteristic. So this is very different than a normal standard network interface thing. Right? This isn't just like a port that you send data to. These guys think about these things as actual like values. So in a thermostat, for example, one of the characteristics might be temperature. Another one might be like the battery level of the thermostat, something like that. Each service is identified by a UUID. Some of the services have 16-bit or 32-bit UUIDs. These ones are defined by the Bluetooth SIG. If you want to get one, you should grab one now because they're selling them. And those will probably run out because there's not very many of them. The custom ones are 128-bit, which means that you can just go to gen UUID on the command line and just pop them out. Just the other cool thing about the services being, UUIDs is 128-bit. You can actually generate those things on the fly too. So if you have two phones that kind of want to like interact, you can actually have one of the phones generate the UUID, send it over some back channel to the other phone, and then the other phone knows that it must be talking to the one that it communicated, that it kind of did a back channel with. So that could be pretty useful. All right, so now let's move on to characteristics, which is about as deep as I'm going to go. So characteristics are also grouped by UUID. So you've got services grouped by UUID. Those things have some number of characteristics. Each one of these represents a value. These values are supposed to be 20 bytes maximum. You can actually increase them to 132 bytes. And the examples are like temperature, humidity, etc. And then finally, I kind of want to talk a little bit about permissions on these characteristics because in order to use them, you have to set permissions on them. So the peripheral is the thing that actually decides what the permissions are on the characteristics. So they're either read, notify, / indicate. Indicate is an asynchronous version of notify. Read is polling. Notify / indicate are both asynchronous. And the difference between those two is like really, subtle and kind of confusing. And then you have write and write without response. So basically, notify is similar to write, and indicate is similar to write without response. So the idea is that write and write without response, this is a little weird. I talked to you guys earlier about how they guarantee delivery of the messages. So it turns out that guarantees delivery on the hardware level, but the app may not be listening. So write versus write without response guarantees that this message was delivered up the stack. And that's why you would want to use write versus write without response. I think it also could help with network race conditions if you have multiple people connecting to the same peripheral and trying to write to the same value. You'll stomp all over each other, and so you might need to get some kind of confirmation that you've actually written. And finally, there's encryption on these things. And I'm running out of time, but I do kind of want to just go over the fact that there's just don't trust the encryption on in BLE. So I don't want to see anybody making a BLE door lock that uses the built-in BLE encryption, because a white paper came out and actually a whole video describing how to crack this stuff. And it's super easy. These guys didn't even talk to a cryptographer about their key exchange protocols and stuff. So it was like a super bonehead newbie mistake. And it's baked into chips now, so that's really sad. So yeah, if you're going to use encryption, you got to use app-level encryption. So use Diffie-Hellman, use strong encryption, RSA, DSA, etc. I don't remember if those are secure anymore or not. Maybe somebody else knows. Now, there's actually, I'll let you guys, I've kind of run out of time now, so I'll let you guys go through the slides on your own. But basically, there's the BLE spec is like large and really hard to understand. Like, you would probably rather get your teeth drilled than read this thing. It's like super labyrinthine. Understanding what part of the spec is what is pretty tough. And so I tried to break out the pieces that are interesting for BLE. There's like at profiles, which is like the underlying thing of BLE. And then there's this thing called a gap profile, which is what talks about the metadata, how your services are discovered and stuff. And then there's this other thing called the GAT profiles. They really like their acronyms. And these things are, this is the actual layout of the services and characteristics that your peripherals provide. And then I'm just going to really quickly go over the details of how we did the BLE networking in OnkiDrive. It's kind of interesting. So one of the big goals of OnkiDrive was that you should be able to take this thing up to your cabin in the woods and play with no Wi-Fi. Or when a kid opens it on Christmas at his grandma's house who doesn't have Wi-Fi, they should be able to play. This was, of course, we did this before the multi-peer connectivity stuff came out. So they didn't tell us about that, unfortunately. But it's fine, actually. This stuff works great. It's like guaranteed latency. So we basically have a service, talks to a car. We call it, we make these things into two-way pipes. So we have a two-peripheral service, and then we've got a two-central service. All this stuff is up in our SDK. You can totally see all these things. Go ahead and hack on our cars and stuff. It also has a really great example of how to do BLE on a Raspberry Pi if you guys are interested. And then finally, so we use this thing as just kind of a bidirectional network. We also have a BLE network service, which, basically we just reuse the same thing. Two peripheral, two client, or two central. And the reason that we did this was because we don't really trust the implementers of BLE, either on the chip or Apple, to get right the details of two people trying to set the value at the same time. That seems like asking for a race condition. So we try to keep these things separate. And this works great. So I recommend, if you guys are interested in making BLE communicating apps, to use two of them. It's that one of them is write and one of them is read. All right, so BLE on iOS. Basically, the things that you need are CB Central Manager, CB Peripheral Manager, and for iBeacons, CL Beacon Region. And what you're going to do is you're going to take, in order to make an iBeacon, you're going to take the output of a CL Beacon region and you're going to pipe that into CL Peripheral Manager to make yourself a new one. And I have a crap ton of ideas for apps that I just don't have time to make. So if you guys are interested, come to my lab tomorrow and I'll give out free ideas. Woo! Free ideas for everybody. All right, so I wanted to give a quick demo of this. And you'll just have to take my word that basically my iPad is not on the network here. You can also go, let me go ahead and give you guys the link at the end of this. For the free sample code that I'm giving out. And this also contains a link to this talk, including all the information I just gave. The keynote is in that GitHub account. But this is called Bleeder. And Bleeder is like, I don't know, BLE Twitter or something. So it allows you to connect directly to other devices that are within 150 feet of you. And it's pretty much really useless, except that it really demonstrates pretty well how to do local area networking and service discovery over BLE. So I will go ahead and turn the sound on my phone. And turn the sound off on my iPad. And I'm going to ask you, sir, to go ahead and type me a message. Anything at all is fine. That's just going to play a sound and deliver this thing to me. Oh, maybe if I was actually in the same room as you, then that would work. Okay. Try one more time. I apologize for the horrendous UI as well. This was just supposed to be a BLE demo. Did it work? Oh, I guess not. Okay, all right. Wireless demo, there you go. Let's see if I can send something to you. No. All right. Demo gods have spoken, everybody. I promise it works. It worked before. Okay, one more time. Okay, yeah, there we go. It makes a cool little bleat sound every time you send something. And here, you should be able to hear it. Whoop. So you got something? Said hi? Yes. There we go. Another one. Yeah. So this app just shows you how to connect and everything. And I guess maybe I should take questions.
Question: when you're the demo with the 4 cars, where you basically had one host connecting to 7 peripherals, basically.
That's right. Yeah. So
how does the 20 milliseconds get divvied up over them? Are you like 140 milliseconds effective latency, or what?
Yeah. No. So the way that it works is Bluetooth Low Energy is time division multiplexed. So you have 20-second or 20. You have actually much lower than 20 millisecond intervals that your period is chopped up into. So that means that you pick some random offset, right? And one individual peripheral will connect every 20 milliseconds, right, in that thing, but you can offset them all, right? And so you can actually multiplex many different peripherals, which is really cool. This is one of the neat reasons why you can have direct connections to every single thing. It's not this mesh. So kind of the single point of failure is Apple, basically. I hope they... Exactly. Yeah, no, and that's exactly how we do it. And in practice, we actually don't see any latency. So we did try this. I want to let you guys know. We tried doing this with GameKit at the same time as Bluetooth Low Energy, and it sucked. Because we found out later that they both use the same scheduler, only GameKit's scheduling on the Bluetooth PAN is at a much lower priority, and so it gets starved. And we were seeing just absolute ballooning of latencies, like up into 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Just felt like crap. So that's why we decided to keep it all on BLE.
You mentioned the Raspberry Pi integration.
Thank you very much.
Do you use USB to connect to the device, or?
Yes, yeah. So for the Raspberry Pi SDK, we have a demo that you can find online. If you go to the Anki webpage, we do use a USB dongle, and it works with. We use the BlueZ library in order to communicate with it. So basically, any USB dongle that's USB 4.0 should work with like a reasonably recent version of Raspberry Pi, as long as it's supported under with BlueZ.
So another question is, if you don't have USB, if I want to add it to some other device, how compact can I get the transmitter and the battery to go along with it?
Oh, geez. Okay, so I actually have a Bluetooth low energy meetup, and we brought some of the Broadcom guys over to pitch us on their new hardware. And they showed us this chip that was about half the size of my pinky fingernail that contained an ARM v7 chip, a Bluetooth low energy transmitter, and the antenna, and a wireless charging controller, like all in that. And it was like $2. So, huh? Oh, no, the battery's extra. Battery's not included. Yeah. Oh, go to Broadcom's website and search for, come talk to me afterwards or come talk to me at the lab tomorrow, but I have the information on this. I think the problem with that is that they had traditionally required you to purchase quite a bit of them, because Broadcom doesn't sell like 1Z, 2Z chips. They sell to like Apple and Google and, HTC and LG and stuff, big companies. Well, the workaround is they're changing that, and they just made an SDK. They're basically trying to get the mom and pop dev shops out there now. And the good thing about them is that they also scale. There are also other manufacturers I should mention, ST Micro, which we use for the brains of Anki Drive, but not for the Bluetooth. And then Nordic, which is extremely committed to Bluetooth low energy, and they make great chips too. Yes.
I've had quite a few friends have issues with maintaining a connection over time. Mm-hmm. Do you have any tips or thoughts about debugging, for instance, the physical part or basic debugging in general?
Yeah, so we found that one of the best ways is to get, there's a couple different things you can do. You need to get RF scanners. So there's this thing out there called the Ubertooth, which is great. Find a friend with a crappy PC and steal it from him, and install Ubertooth and Linux on it, and then that's basically what they use to hack the BLE encryption. So you can see not only all of the traffic that's happening over BLE, it'll also give you like a spectrograph and other cool stuff like that, and it's like $100. So super cheap, open source, very nice. Also, TI makes a little kind of key stick dongle that you can use to listen in. It's, in my experience, not as nice. It takes 3 of them, because remember, there's 3 advertising channels. So you have to hear, in order to follow the BLE signal across its like little, dancing game across the channels, you have to hear the advertisement, and you have to see the handshake. Otherwise, you're going to see it, and it's going to pop out of existence. So it takes 3 of those things listening at the same time to effectively be able to follow the BLE signal. Yep, is that it? Okay, we're good. Thank you very much. And I've got a lab on Wednesday from 9 a.m. until noon. So if anybody wants to stop by, I'll give them some help with BLE.
Thank you, everyone.
be able to connect to your mobile phone. But the current, or previous to Bluetooth Low Energy, the sort of communication protocols that could connect to these low-power devices were all very, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of the word right now. They were all proprietary. So nothing worked with anything else. And I'm talking about like the mice, like you know, the little dongles that they use to connect mice to your computer, and things like that, keyboards, etc. Everybody rolled their own, and this sucked because you can't put a dongle on a phone. That's no fun.
Okay. Please give a round of applause to Mark Pauley.
Hello. Okay. You guys hear me? Is that good? Hey, how's it going? My name is Mark Pauley. As she said, I used to work on NSURL Connection. I'm sorry. I'm now working at Anki. I'm the lead iOS software engineer there. I was involved with the stunt last year in front of WWDC. That was probably the scariest moment of my entire life. I think I still have PTSD from that. And I'm here to talk to you guys today about Bluetooth Low Energy, which is kind of a little-known technology. Maybe a lot of you guys here know it because you're very technical, but this is a pretty little-known technology, and I think it's going to be basically as important, if not more important, than USB, for example. So, you know, what's the deal with this? Basically, there's this concept of the Internet of Things that people are throwing around, and this is like, we're going to have everything connected to the Internet. So, you know, we're going to have clocks and trains and cows and other stuff connected to the Internet. The question is, like, what is this connection medium? And I think that, you know, the medium is very important. Like, the protocol that we're connecting over makes a huge difference in what we can do with it. And the main challenges for this
Our next speaker is a former Apple employee, did a lot of work on the NSURL connection. He currently works on robots at Anki. You may have seen him somewhere before.
Oh, looks like the top of this is getting cut off somehow. First challenge is power. So the batteries need to be very, very small in these little Internet of Things devices. You're going to have devices everywhere, right? Like all over the place. You're going to have hearing aids that want to be connected to the Internet, heart monitors, kind of anything that you could think would want to be connected to the Internet, because we want to gather data and use this as feedback mechanism. The next is that you shouldn't have to recharge your battery all the time. You don't want to have to plug your watch in every 3 hours, right? Next thing is connectivity. So this is kind of funny. It seems like it goes without saying, but it should